In this video tutorial, we're going to be going to the Consignor Data screen. Let's go ahead and click on that. You'll notice that it has a little blue area at the top of all the major screens in here, like the report listing. Certain screens, like the buyer data, have a little blue line. And these screens are sectional, meaning that they are from a different section of the application tutorials, and we'll be covering those individually. So let's go ahead and go to the Consignor Data screen. The purpose of this screen is that it is the primary screen in the application. What does that mean? A primary screen is the individual record for one consignor. Basically what this is the consignor ID, and this is record number 1. What that means is this is the first consignor in the application. This number sequences as a new consignor is added. To add a new consignor record, you click on the Add Record button at the top of the screen. When you add the new record, this will sequence by one number. So it would go up to number 2 and so forth as you add new consignors. A consignor is an individual store or person in the application. You can have multiple records with a different ID for people within your store. Maybe you have a manager that has his own consign records. You may have a family member, or maybe you have volunteers that bring in consignment items, but they work in your store part-time. You can create a new record for each one of those. So that would be the multiple different records that you would have. So each time you assign a new consignor, a permanent ID is made for that particular signer. In this case, I recommend that when you put the first record in, it is your store, the basic store that you're within and your business. If you have multiple stores, you can have multiple consignor records. You don't want to try to put in different stores all in the same record, because if you have a physical store in another location, you do not have the consigned items in that store. So you'd have to be traveling back and forth if you had to sell something. Now you can obviously move items from store to store, but if you're doing the application in a multiple user type of environment where you have multiple stores, this application would be put on the cloud in a server, and it's hosted there. And what that means is multiple users can access it through a username and password, and then they can have all the records you see in one store in all the locations. In addition to that, if you're a cloud application, the cloud application would allow you to take an iPad, iPhone, or other device like an Android device using a browser, or the server, which is the cloud version, would be on a browser on your current workstation. All of those available things would be there, and you could access and edit data from the major server on the host, and then each location or each person could have their own device to access the records. And that's not just their records, they could access any record. Now, if you do not want different employees to have access to certain information in different screens, like the invoices and stuff like that, we can edit the application so that it will only work for certain groups of individuals that are assigned in that group. Then they're restricted on other things that we set up. Okay, so that's the basics of this screen. It is the individual start screen where each individual consignor has their own records. And as I said, they also link to multiple other screens that are related to that particular consignor. Okay, let's start out looking at what's on the screen now. We've already covered the app map. We've covered the Do Action menu in the first tutorial. In this thing, the first new thing that we're looking at is the Add Record. So if we click on this, it'll create a new record. Now, I'm not going to do that in this particular area because I don't want to create a lot of example records that are not going to be used. If you get this application, it has data records already in it, you can overwrite those. And what that basically means is that you would write your own store name in when you create or run over the one that's already available. Let me go over and look over here where it says List View. There's currently 3 different records in here. So there's 3 consignor IDs, and I made up some example records. What you would need to do is go ahead and replace the data that's in each one of these records with your own information. So we're calling that overwriting the application. In order to access any one of those records, you'd come in here to the List View, and you go ahead and start a search. You drop this down, and you would click on the Start Search. You'd come in here, and then you'd put whatever information is applicable that you want to use, like an address, the contact's name, or the primary contact, and or the consignor ID. What I would do is I put in like number 1 for the first store consignor ID. And then I would go ahead and say perform the find, and it would bring that record in. What happens once I bring the record in, I can go in and edit that record. Say, for example, I had several thousand items in here. I would do that search to find either a group of people or a location or a telephone exchange or the IDs in a range. So let's go ahead and look at we could edit this record, but before I do that, I want to point out, if you do a search, the records that show up here would be called the records in selection. There could be 1 to the number of ways that you actually look for them that they would come up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the do action, and then I'm going to say go down here and I'm going to say show all records. Click on that and it brings all the records back. If you don't do that, and the next time you come into this screen, you're only going to see the first record. That might just throw you and you won't know what's going on. If you remember to go in and say show all records, it'll bring all the records back. If somebody else is using in a multiple user environment is doing a search, it's going to show them the screen with whatever number of items are on the screen. This is something you're going transient to this record. You're only going to come in here, find the record you're looking for, and then go out. But always put the records back, the current selection, from the current selection to all records. Okay, let's go back and we're going to edit in this record. These are pretty obvious things. The first things, you'd put in the name, the address, the main person's email. If you have a Skype address, you can put in the Skype. On the website, put in your website using the HTTP colon / on the front, or it won't function correctly. If you want to go to your website or somebody that actually put their own website in for one of the consignor records, you click go to site and it'll actually open up the record for that in the browser. Then you would go ahead on a suffix. This might be junior or senior or whatever as far as a suffix on there. The DOB is for date of birth. The reason I added this in there is we had over the years an issue with certain people that knew another client's or consignor's ID and information. But what this does is serves as a check. So say somebody calls you and they want to know about a certain consignment item, or they want to ask you to send the commission to a certain address or something like that that's different from what this current person has given us. This is a way to check and say, well, I need your birthday to know what that, if you're a current user, and you might want to ask another question too. That's just one way of verifying who is actually the person that is trying to get information and if they're the proper person that you're looking for their records. Sum of sales. Sum of sales is where you've invoiced items for items sold, and this is the total number of sales that you've had for this particular client. So you can go record to record and see what the individual consignors have sold for their consignment for this store or the individual themselves. And as I pointed out a little while ago, you may have multiple different stores, and that would be the individual for each consignor within that store or record for the individual consignor. You would have, in this case, I put county and town because these are sold internationally. Like in Europe, for example, in England, they don't just have a county, they have a town named to it. So for example, if this guy was in Bath and a township within Bath in London, he may have a different thing here. Now, why would you have that if it's a consignor? Well, I've had clients that had websites and they took in items from all over as consigned items. These are the high-end businesses that are using my application where they take consignment items from all over. They are shipped on a passing thing. For example, if somebody is going to sell something and they want it on your site as a consignor, they can actually physically have the item in their location, and you would use the picture and offer it on your, say, website, for example. And it's like a drop ship store for those particular items. They may be too large to ship around to get them to your store and then send them to somebody else at another location. So what you can actually do is you can create all the information for the consignor in case you had to have it if you shipped it to a country or a different country. Like if I was in the United States and I had a client that wanted something large to go to Canada, then I would go ahead and have all the information required in order to ship that drop shipped item to Canada, even though he may have sold it in the U.S. If he sells the item in the U.S., I need to have that same information for that consignor to know where to send it if he has the physical custody of that item. Okay, if that's the next thing. Then we have the city. where the person of record, the consignor, is located, the state or province, the zip code, and the country. All this stuff comes into play. We had one database we wrote over 2.5 years and then modified it, where a guy had an international sales thing where he had stuff all over the world, and people consigned them to his website, and then he sold them all over the world. So we need to know where we're sending commissions and stuff to by putting it in there for the consignor that's current. Okay, the primary telephone for the person if we had to contact them. A second telephone, this could either be a spouse or a store or whatever. A fax number if required, or an other work number. The type of consignor. Type of consignor is related to certain kinds of consignors. I'll give you one for example. It might be local to you, or it may be international, or it could be a local, what we call a picker. A picker is a person that goes to estate sales and whatever, picks up items and then brings them to your consignment store and tries to resell them there. We'll talk a little bit more about that under the consignment item listing as far as some of the relevant things about what kind of consignor you're working with. There's a second contact. This may be another person in the store, or if it's a husband and wife team, it might be the wife information. And then 2 different emails. The list view we already showed you, and there's the type, return type. What this means is if you're running, and I'll be showing this in the near term on another video, what is a return or donate? This particular client, as a consignor, I should say, is one who may be signed up to a contract that tells the store owner that upon the end of a term, say for example, you keep items in consignment for 90 days. At the end of 90 days, you notify the person to either come in and get the item, or we're going to donate them, or are we going to return them to them? At that point, what you do is if they're going to donate them, they're actually donating them to the store. And you, as a further thing, can take that donation and either send it to a church or something like that as a charity type thing. Or the client wants you to return every item that doesn't sell at the end of the term of the item. So then you would click this. If you clicked in a return, for example, the radio button, if you wanted to go over to donate, you could change it. It's the primary way that we send items out after they've run the term. In this case, if you want to go back to a blank, push your shift key down on your keyboard and then go ahead and click in here and it takes it out. Now, these buttons down here at the bottom of the screen will walk through the different records. The reason I've added these in this particular screen, they're not in all the screens, is that you are doing a lot of work in these screens moving through either different people, or in this case on the consignor item records up here, you're moving from the individual portal records up and down through the different records, because you cannot do a find in a portal. You have, in a scrolling portal like this, you have to go to the individual record like this and then do your find or searches in here. So if you go to the do action in here, you start your search here and you perform the search in there to find the item record that you're looking for. Let's go back over to the record that we're looking at. So in this screen, what I can do is I can go to the next record and you see it changes, or the prior record, which goes back to the original. So you can navigate very quickly through here, or you can go to the list view and do the search that we talked about before. Comments and notes. This has 2 different approaches. You can make notes about individual items that have an issue with them as far as the consigned items. You can also do that in the consignment item listing. But in this particular case, most of the time, this would be comments about this consignor, pro or con. Are there issues with this consignor and you may want to drop him as a consignor? Or maybe you're doing certain things with this consignor. For example, you may be doing an event where this particular person is wants to do a estate sale. Now, one of the most lucrative things in doing a consignment store is the ability to do estate sales for people. This may sound far-fetched, but it's probably where you'll make the most money on a week-to-week basis. Basically, if you do consignment sales for an estate, what this does is that you can put information about this particular person. They may be a one-off estate sale and you'll never use them again. So you want to know that down here, that maybe they're moving out of the area and you're having a moving sale and selling everything in their house for them as far as consignment. This is why you can take this application to that site and you can run the entire auction or estate sale or a moving sale and have all the items indicated in the consignment items listing. And this is a much more efficient way to do a consignment sale where you're out doing an event. And the event obviously would be something that would be a one-time thing, or maybe you're going to repeat a certain kind of a consignment event often, but it's really within the particular client. Or when I say client, I'm talking about the consignment person right here. So you create events either in your store or say in an estate sale, and then you use the support items by adding the items and then defining what the event is about. And also there's a map in here, and what the map does is it gives you directions to where the estate sale is. So if you wanted to create a map for, say, an advertising thing, you can go ahead and have the person's address used in this particular screen for the consignor, or if it's not that particular consignor and it's a consignor doing an event where it's a different map and he has a different address, just open up the map, put the address in here, and go ahead and then print the map or copy the map and put it into your advertisement. Now, being very clear, the address that shows up in here is based on what the address is that you put in here. So the map will open and show that. You can edit the map when it's open and put a different address in there and then shoot the capture screen on that particular map if you want to. Okay, this is the conclusion of this particular video. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to go through these popovers, and we're going to explain the usage of the popovers and how they work in the application and what different things here we'll be going through as we're going through that particular thing. So we'll be in the consign data screen in the next video, but we'll be covering these items in here and also going through everything that's related. For all the consigned items, we're going to cover all of these screens in this area, including the consigned data and the popovers. Okay, let's start the next tutorial at this point.